You're listening to the Assembly on Allergy, Immunology, and Inflammation podcast, brought to you by the American Thoracic Society.
Yeah, so thank you both for joining me today. This is ATS podcast with the Allergy, Immunology Early Career Working Group. We were going to talk about research and basic science sustainability. Today, I have a panel of two guests. Dr. Emma Thornell. She's a research assistant professor in the Pulmonary and Critical Care Occupational Medicine Division at the University of Iowa. She got her PhD in conservation medicine at Universidad Andres Bello in Santiago, Chile, and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in occupational environmental health at the University of Iowa. And she primarily investigates the overlap of lung disease and environmental exposures, and also has been, spearheading a lot of really awesome sustainability research that we've been doing in our lab and sort of the lab floor that we have at the University of Iowa. And we're also joined by Miss Emily Colpack, and she has a master's in public health and is a sustainability lead and services coordinator at the Green Labs, my Green Labs at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And today we talking about the discussion of sustainability research. It's sort of a very important topic in, today's world, but it really has always been. But it focuses on creating this balance between environmental, social, and economic systems to sort of do things ethically, sustainable, but without compromising some of the future goals that we have in pursuing research, but just being very conscious about how and the impact of what we're doing and how we may be able to do it better. And so I just wanted to give that brief intro before just asking you both, when we talk about in the setting of basic science research, which I think we all have, a layering of our job with, wanted to ask you both, how much does research, particularly basic science lab-based research, contribute to environmental waste? And just generally speaking, and talking on how is it measured, and then what areas sort of contribute the most. And we can maybe start with Emma. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so unfortunately, scientific operations require a lot of energy consumption, energy and water specifically. So I've read that it's roughly 10x what a normal office building consumes. And the only field that has more energy consumption than science is data centers. But of course, we rely on big data to analyze some of our outcomes. So yeah, it's a really, really large footprint. And we can get into depth later, but just to touch on the kind of the health aspect, because we're working in, at least you and I, Miles, we're working in internal medicine. And so, of course, when you require more energy, at this point, most of it's a large percentage of it is not renewably generated. And so that leads to more coal-fired related pollution and downstream consequences, which of course impact our respiratory health. So there are all these kind of intrinsic links between sustainability and health and environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good points. And with some of the research that you both do when you're talking about and just trying to quantify some of that, Emily, could you comment on like how, like at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, how do you guys measure it in different capacities to sort of gauge the footprint that you guys are
Absolutely. For
working
the
with and trying to
longest
improve?
time, it was a big struggle to kind of measure our footprint in terms of at least what our research labs were doing energy-wise. My green lab is the place where we get our numbers of 10 times more energy than a traditional office space, 5 times as much water, and lots of plastic waste come from research labs. And they are important to note that they're not even, we don't really have the data for our biohazardous waste. And by our biohazardous waste, I mean every lab sends biohazardous waste out, and that doesn't just go to a normal landfill. It has to be specially autoclaved or sterilized, and then it gets sent to a special landfill. And those are quite rough on our ecosystem and where people live. No one wants to live next to the biohazardous waste landfill.
And sometimes it's burned. I mean,
Yes, sometimes it's also burned.
Baltimore struggles with that.
Yeah, but through my Green Lab, UAB has been able to actually do what we call energy audits. It's not with all of the equipment that the lab has, but my Green Lab has estimates for some of the main pieces of equipment like centrifuges, hot water baths, ULTs. And we are able to take that information and we go through the lab and we talk about, okay, you have this many centrifuges. This is how often they're on, and we're able to have a really good idea of, okay, before Green Labs, they left all these pieces of equipment on. Afterwards, joining Green Labs, they were able to turn off these items and save this much electricity, which translates to this much money.
Yeah, and I know firsthand seeing some of the stuff that Emma has shared about that with our lab as well, like some of the energy saved and cost and so within each of your separate labs that you're sort of looking at this, what could you both touch on? You kind of mentioned a few of those things as well as like data related energy consumption, but what areas for each of your respective labs would you say contribute the most to that energy consumption and waste? Is it simply some of the data centers and the bio waste, or is there even some other things that we might not be thinking about?
Well, as
And if you
Emily
want to start, Emma,
mentioned,
we'll go there.
sure, yeah. And I'm happy to go back and forth, by the way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so Emily was a
Yeah.
real leader, and we reached out to Emily when we first started getting going because I'd seen her speak at I believe it was the AAMC group where I first heard you speak. Yeah. There's a community within AAMC dedicated to sustainability and healthcare. So Emily and
That's awesome.
UAB are real leaders in the field. So it was great to touch base with her early on. And she pointed out, of course, the autoclave is one that we kind of, it took us a while to really appreciate its impact, but some of the Migraine Lab statistics on autoclaves are staggering. And they're a difficult device to directly measure. We do some direct measurement of energy consumption using kilowatt hour basically plug-in watt meters. But because they're so huge and they have different voltage requirements and you don't want to break an autoclave, we haven't directly measured that. But it's like billions of gallons of water a year they can consume. It's just wild. And then the energy too. So we've kind of over time between what's available in the literature, what we've directly measured, uh, the big three that I think of are autoclaves, hoods, and biosafety cabinets, and ultra low temp freezers. So that's kind of in a simplistic way, the way that I'm thinking of the huge energy consumers. And then in the case of autoclaves, water, of course, too. So anything you can do to kind of mitigate their consumption, such as shutting a sash of a fume hood, speaking with FM if some that are never used could be hibernated, turning off biosafety cabinets either between use or at the end of the day, powering up ultra low temp freezers to -70, -65. There's a lot of basic maintenance that can be done in ultra low temp freezers that also improves their efficiency. And then, of course, either putting a timer on the autoclave so it automatically turns off at the end of each day or whenever it's not in use. That sort of thing can be really helpful. But Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, I think You did touch on the big three: ultra low temperature freezers, fume hoods. Fume hoods can use 3.5 homes worth of energy, and that's because of the overall HVAC system. They take cool air from the lab, suck it in, and then they exhaust it out because you don't want to recirculate hazardous fumes. And they're on all the time and they can't be turned off. So yes, shutting them does help. Freezers, depending on the model, how old it is, it can use less than a home's worth of energy, or it can use 3 homes worth of energy, just one freezer. Specifically, those older ones tend to use a lot of energy. And then, of course, the autoclaves as well. And I think the biggest impact of helping people be better about how much energy they use is education. It's just simply, I will admit, when I was in college, I had a fume hood, and my TA told me I had to keep closing it. And I was really annoyed because why would I want to close it? That's like an extra little step that I just had to keep opening and closing it to get things in and out, and it was bothersome. If my TA had explained that it was to help with safety, did I realize that at the time? No, I was a college student. But yes, it does help with safety. And then additionally, how much energy that the fume hood uses, I just didn't know. So when I found out it used 3.5 homes worth of energy, it was like, oh wow, it is worth the extra hassle of opening and closing. And so when our researchers kind of learn how much energy something uses, it's a lot easier for them to go, oh, yes, this has a really big impact. And then an education of how to use the autoclaves. No one really knows, I would say, specifically, which is fair. Every brand has a specific way, every model is slightly different. And so we've been really working with our researchers on how to use the autoclave correctly so that it doesn't break. And then also, we don't have excess cycles run because they didn't autoclave something properly. And that way we know, okay, these are the recommended temperatures, this is the recommended time, this is the dry time I should use. And that way they don't have to continuously run extra cycles because it wasn't done right the first time. And then, of course, it's not going to be as broken.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty easy to break an autoclave, unfortunately.
I think Emily brings up such a good point. A lot of the fear of making changes that would save a lot of energy is just a lack of knowledge. Like, we're not trained to think in this perspective. And so when you come into a lab, you're going to do the thing that you think will lead to the least amount of problems. It could be throwing everything in the biohazardous bin just in case. You get in trouble, or the lab gets audited, or leaving the autoclave on because you don't want to break it. So a huge component is education, and especially educating the younger people who are perhaps going to spend the rest of their career in science and who don't have as much established dogma in their heads.
No,
Absolutely.
those are all like really awesome things to touch on, and I feel like um, it
I
leads
also want to say
pretty
I am
nicely
not
into.
the
Oh,
autoclave expert. I have talked a lot to our service reps who actually fix the autoclaves. So I'm able to ask them, okay, what's getting broken most often? What's our number one issue that researchers are doing wrong? And we actually have a training where once a month they come and researchers are able to ask them questions. That way it's a little more believable than just me being like, hi. Here's how an autoclave works.
That's
yeah,
funny.
having a team I think probably helps for sure. And it leads nicely into the next question, which you guys have already sort of touched on a decent amount, which is what is currently being done and kind of some of those pitfalls, and to sort of make a lab more sustainable and sort of conscious about the waste that they're creating. Some of things that you had mentioned, Emily, about the older freezers, but maybe there's issues with replacing those, because can you get rid of that sustain, like can you get rid of that in a an ethical way that's not just adding to waste, but does that outweigh what you would have in efficiency and things like that, as well as education, like you guys were already talking about in different programs, which I know in our lab, Emma has been doing a lot of that, where we just kind of have sessions of teaching people about different aspects of the lab. So could you both touch on that as well? What's
Yeah, I
currently
can
being done in a big effort, and sort of where areas that are still problematic?
I can kind of begin with at least public universities, at least in Alabama. Anything that is UAB property has to be disposed of through surplus. And so we don't really get an option of where things go after they are no longer usable. Everything gets sent to surplus because this was bought with, grant money. So ideally, state taxes. And then the idea is um, the public is able to bid on the items that UAB is no longer able to use. And so that is where a lot of our freezers go. And by a lot, I mean like pretty much all of them because that's where they're supposed to go by law. A lot of the times researchers will repair their freezers when they can. Um, and we do want people to repair them, but at some point when the freezer is about 40 years old, we really do encourage them to completely get a brand new one, because that old freezer is just not working as well as it's supposed to. And then the pitfalls, I would say, is just solely lack of education. Green Labs is really, really new. Not every university has a Green Labs program, and so the pitfalls just solely people just don't know. There's so much that we don't know in the lab. There's constantly things we're working on of working with like safety, I think is where we really thrive, is combining our sustainability with safety. So the autoclaves are a big safety hazard. They are giant pressure cookers. If someone is trying to break open the autoclave when the pressure is not zero, to get their stuff out of the autoclave, that is a big safety hazard. And so we're really able to combine with safety and say, oh, okay, you probably should not be breaking open this door. Let's not do that anymore. Let's contact the correct service representative. And then Emma mentioned this with biohazardous waste. A lot of people in the lab will just throw something about hazardous waste because they don't know what maybe the safety requirements are to like the very small detailed degree. And so they're just going to throw everything that they have in that biohazardous waste. And so we work with safety on educating our researchers of, hey, this is what is biohazardous, this is what is not biohazardous. I always challenge them whenever I talk to them. I'm like, okay, do you know the rules? They always say yes. And then I go, okay, what if you have this item? What are you going to do with it? And then it's kind of like silent. I'm like, you probably throw it in the biohazard bin, correct? And they go, yes. I'll be like, well, actually, you don't have to do that. Let me connect you with our environmental health representative, and they will be able to walk you through more closely what exactly you're doing in your research and let you know that you may not need to be autoclaving this waste in the first place, and it may not even need to be biohazardous waste.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And from a 10,000 foot perspective, I mean, Emily brings up such great points. UAB is really one of the top universities for green labs in the country. CU Boulder is another real luminary. Certain universities have invested in green labs. And so that looks like a different process than something like our voluntary initiative on one floor. As much as we can try to connect with different parties and people, and we've made inroads for sure, but when you have a university investment in it, you're able to kind of formalize some of the things that we are just kind of piloting. There's
Yeah.
flexibility in that with the voluntary approach. But as Emily mentioned, if you get connected to EHS or FM about safety, it's more believable than if your peer tells you, hey, you should do this because this is the way we've been taught
Sure.
it's done. There's credibility there and there's institutional buy-in, and that makes a lot of sense because the university stands to save a lot of money by using resources more efficiently. But yeah, so
Yeah.
so currently being done looks very different. institution to institution, department to department, across the country. And some other, there's private universities that are really leading, like Caltech. So you kind of have a really varied landscape there. And then I think Emily made really great points. I don't have much to add. Aside from kind of trying to get a critical mass of people on board in order to have it kind of become second nature in a shared space, to recycle the right things, to use only the type of water that you need for the job and not use DI water for everything. All of these little things, if you see them happening, you start to kind of emulate them, especially if you're younger and you're kind of learning. And we also are learning, so it's a very iterative process. In the last year, we've started turning off the autoclave. We've been doing this for a few years, but you learn as you go, and the systems change. We're getting more recycling. We're kind of constantly trying to adapt, but it's a very iterative process. So I think hopefully that answered your question
Oh
on my
yeah,
end.
100%. You guys did a great job. Thank you for all the important points there. And maybe should have done this a little earlier, but I thought in my head it made sense for the timing of the outline. But could you guys touch on like what exactly My Green Labs is and sort of as a network, and then sort of the process of acquiring that status at different institutions?
Yeah, I mean, do you mind if I take this one since I worked with them
Absolutely.
for a while?
Yeah, great. Please do.
So, UAB has been working with My Green Lab since, I believe, 2018, before my time. And My Green Lab is a nonprofit. They really work on education in terms of how to be more sustainable in the lab. My Green Lab has also a new private entity. Oh gosh, Emma, what was it called? Do you remember?
Oh, it's not not the act label part.
No, it's,
Let me look.
I don't want to get it wrong.
Sure. It's not that. Okay, I'm thinking of the eco label.
It has to do with their uh
I wish I could be more
party
helpful.
kind of. I don't remember what it's called.
But I believe while Emma's looking that up, it's both a national and an international um, organization, correct?
Correct.
And it's
Yeah.
sort of almost like helping create a standard across, places, and sort of as much as, anything that we do in science and healthcare, sometimes having a cookie cutter thing can sometimes feel restricting both in research and in, when it comes to healthcare. If there's, but at the end of the day, guidelines and things like that are really helpful to bring everyone up to at least an improved benchmark, and that's what at least my understanding from a crude standpoint is kind of a mission of My Green Labs.
So, um, when we work with My Green Lab, they do an amazing thing. They hold online conferences. They have plenty of resources on their website. Another place that has a lot of resources for free on their website is the International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories, which we are a part of, or I'm a part of. I think Emma has recently joined potentially.
Yes.
Yes, awesome. And those are
Love
the
to add
free
that as some
things.
info to this podcast episode, so other people we'll make sure that we add that down.
Yes. And then in terms of My Green Lab certification, we actually pay money for our labs to become officially My Green Lab certified. And so you mentioned correctly, it's more of a national and international standard to kind of be able to say, okay, these labs are saying they're doing these things, and we have requested that we get confirmation of those items. And so we'll send them pictures of what our labs are doing, and the lab will have to provide documentation of we have actually added this to our SOPs and our procedures and protocols. And that is where they kind of transition a little bit to more of the nonprofit side, where they're a third-party certification. And we pay a certain amount of money, and then the lab is able to get all the My Green Lab resources. They take a survey. They then get kind of an assessment where they can actually measure their energy usage based on what I mentioned before. This is where you get those special numbers for how much a centrifuge uses in kilowatt hours. They also have a section for water, waste, and there's one more that
Computing,
that
they
might
did
be.
add that recently.
Yeah. And so we use those. We focused most on energy consumption because that's a lot easier for our team to do. But it's really up to the lab if they want to start measuring how much water they're using. Oh, and biohazardous waste as well. And so they're able, and Emma's done a fantastic job of measuring that. I'm quite jealous of what she's got going on. It's amazing. Every time I think about what we could be doing next, I'm like, I need to really push more about biohazardous waste, and Emma's done a fantastic job. So I'll let her kind of talk about that later. But in terms of My Green Lab, they're a nonprofit, so there's a lot of resources available on their website, a lot of information about Green Labs, which I think is, as I mentioned before, education is the number one thing. And so people being
Yeah.
able to
And,
look up and have a resource where they can trust is really, really important.
and that's so cool that I know you said it takes some buy-in to become certified in that, but it sounds like with all the educational resources it provides, as well as ways that it basically helps that institution save money ultimately.
Yeah. So the
I
way
feel like it makes so much
UAB's
sense.
The way UAB's set up is our labs don't have to pay anything, and we from the sustainability office pay for that My Green Lab certification.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they
Um,
have free resources too. I mean, I think their accredited professionals course, one
Mhm.
of them, they have, I forget which one. They do have a free resource
They
if
have a
you
lot.
personally want to undertake more sustainability in your own practice in a lab. And it's not like unduly expensive either. So I think it was 500 for our entire floor of like 100
okay, cool.
investigators. So it's if you have buy-in, but yeah.
Yeah. So I have a few things. I think we maybe have 10 minutes or so left that kind of with the time that we might have. But a couple things I wanted to just touch on was at each of your institutions, is there um, things that you could just highlight outside of what you already have, which has been a wonderful place to start for a lot of places that maybe aren't doing this yet or could easily sort of adopt some of these things. Um, Maybe three things that you guys each think that a lab that maybe isn't already participating in something this like this could adopt to really make a difference at both the lab level and the individual level. Um, and then I was just going to ask you both if you felt like with your efforts, if there was majority buy-in from the researchers that you work with, or is there sometimes resistance just because people are sometimes a little resistant to change, and this is definitely, a change, but a change for the better. But just wanted to get both of your perspectives on something like that.
Yeah. I can go first. In terms of buy-in, our program is completely voluntary. So the lab at any point can just say, I don't want to be part of Green Labs. They have to spend quite a lot of work to be part of Green Labs. They have to take that survey, and then they, in addition, have to do an hour-long presentation with me or my coworker. And we really go deep in depth. Okay, this is what your lab's doing based on the survey results, and here are your options. I like to say we're more of a resource. Instead of telling people what to do, I just kind of like to give them options of like, this is what you can do. Oh no, I really want to keep that piece of equipment on. We use it all the time. Fair enough. We'll move on to your next option. And then we also have them do a special walkthrough. So I go in the lab with our Green Lab contact, and we go through and we sticker equipment. You'd be so impressed. I think that's our number one thing I recommend new people to try and do is stickers. They don't have to be fancy. It can be a post-it note that says turn this off after each use. But
Okay, I was
UAB,
gonna ask
we
what kind of
have
stickers are we talking about? Okay.
so we have got like special stickers that say never turn off, ask before turning off, always turn off after each use. That way it's actually on the equipment and we do it with the lab. I never put the sticker on the equipment because I'm always going to do it wrong. It's going to be crooked or something. So I let
It's
the lab do it
built-in
themselves,
education.
and I think so much hands-onness is really why we get a lot of buy-in. We have over 200 labs part of our program, and they've all been doing that hour-long presentation and that walkthrough, and they have to recertify every 2 years. And our kind of older labs that have been with us since 2018 are absolutely stellar. And then we give labs special stickers when they reach a certain certification, and that really gets a lot of other labs wanting to join. They see the stickers and they go, I'm the only lab on this floor that isn't Green Lab certified. Let me get started.
Bragging rights.
Bragging rights, absolutely. And so my big thing is I say safety is my number one priority. I'm never going to recommend something that's not safe or ask you to do something that's not safe. My second priority is research integrity. And so I really, really want to push that your research is being protected. So if there's something you feel you can't do because it's going to compromise your research, I'm always on board of don't do it. And then the third thing I care about is sustainability. And I think Emma does a really, really good job of getting that kind of morale of everyone involved. We aren't really able to do like we have certain buildings that are more Green Lab certified than others, but I do wish I was more kind of on the floor being able to help motivate labs.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And
so Emily brought up a lot of great points. It's funny what little thing, what seems like such a small thing, like a sticker can do. We've been lucky because in a way it's a pretty, again, it's one floor, one environment. So I think we realized early on that if you don't get buy-in from PIs, you need a critical mass of people to get to buy into it. And so to Emily's point about the labs that started in 2018 doing really well, I think it's the sort of process that hopefully will grow at the longer it's in place. But getting it in place can be a little bit of a challenge, and you learn a lot about personalities and people and social skills and dogma. So I would say in order to get started, one thing I would advise is thinking really critically about how to actively engage people. So for example, does your lab work best based on being competitive? Could you set up a competition? We did that with biohazardous waste or tried to. They were kind of like, is this really a competition? But we tried to tap into the competitive instinct. Making it really easy for people is another important piece. Nobody's going to want to take 5 extra steps if they're doing an assay. They want alternatives that are very convenient and very available. So for waste, you want to keep it near to people and something that's just like mindless. And then anytime you can automate something like having your autoclave on a schedule, and Emily taught us about how to do that. I still need to do it, but right now we're still manually turning it off. But automating things, you can set up timers. So if a lab person says, well, I always need this hot plate on, you could provide them a timer and say, well, could you turn it off between like 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. perhaps? And then they're like, oh, well, maybe, I guess, and then giving data. So we work with Love Data. So we tested how long does it take for the autoclave to get hot? Well, it's only 15 minutes. Can you turn it on 15 minutes before you go? And it would save this much energy. And then focusing on the low-hanging fruit. Really, the big three ultra low temp freezers, focusing on the models before even like 2015 are a lot less efficient than the models now. So doing regular maintenance on those, and defrosting and cleaning the coils, and then shutting off biosafety cabinets, shutting sashes on hoods, turning off autoclaves. Like they're really easy, low-hanging fruit there, just to kind of get buy-in, and then you can level up as you go. But again, I think you might, if someone was trained 40 years ago to do something a certain way and it's always worked for them, it's going to be hard to convince that person. But if you convince someone who's 20 years old and is just starting out their career, really focusing on them, I actually would like to turn the question back to Miles and see like what have you found easy to change, or what have you adopted in your practice in the lab, or like what has been effective communication style from us? Like I'm curious from
Yeah.
your experience.
Thanks, Emma. I was actually just going to say some of the stuff that from personally working with you that I think have been really helpful was the education, like you guys have both touched on, is huge. And I think those periodic emails that you send to sort of update us and kind of show that, these efforts are doing something in real time, and not just like we had like a module that we had to do at the beginning of the semester and then we forgot about it. I think that periodic sort of educational touching base is like super important. And it's kind of almost like, you'd imagine, I know a lot of people don't read the newspaper anymore, but like it'd be almost like a newspaper headline, like, hey, this is an update, this is what's going on. And then I also feel like when you had sort of instituted some of those ideas of like sharing freezers and like having other PIs that, there may have been a PI that had been a little, more resistant or just maybe more set in their ways. But if like other colleagues are sort of saying, yeah, I'll do it, or I'll do this, I think that sort of almost, gentle peer pressuring is helpful. And especially, like you said, some of those people that have been in the lab for, sometimes decades, and they don't really are resistant to change. But if they see all their colleagues that they work with every day that are also doing it, and then just like we've said with the education, knowing that we're not just doing it because we want to, disrupt your day. We're doing it because we're trying to make this like something that we can keep doing lifelong and not like hurting the world around us. Because personally, and I know both of you guys aren't working in the healthcare space, but like I know that some of the listeners that'll participate with this podcast, I personally, and I think they might be able to relate as a pulmonary critical care person, I think as awesome as that field is, and I love doing it, there's a lot of waste in that field sometimes too. There's just so many equipment and different things that we utilize in the critical care space that can be so consuming. And I personally have always kind of had that on the back of my mind when, it's not something I'm, weighing at the moment that I'm dealing with a patient, but at the same time, I'm like, man, that I think about that sometimes. And then I feel really fortunate to be able to do the physician scientist stuff that I'm doing, but then add in another thing that's sort of waste producing. Sometimes there's definitely a guilt that I carry doing both of those fields. As much as I love them both, very waste generating. And so I feel like any effort I can make, which I've, been really happy you've been kind of doing some of these things, Emma, and I can, without having to dedicate like a ton of focus into knowing how to do these different things, I can just kind of follow your lead, and it's been really nice.
Can I add real quick? That's really great. It just reminded me that it took me like at least 6 years. I was a postdoc here for 6 years. I think around the sixth year, it was like, I really want to actually do something about it. And maybe when I got promoted, I was like, okay, I don't care anymore. I can say something, out loud. But I think that has been such a positive experience for me. And it's really led me to develop my passion. And it's been like an energy generating type of event that
Awesome.
really was precipitated by forming a team. So it wasn't just me. I worked with, there are at least 10 of us who intermittently checked in and developed strategies, and we worked together. I think having that camaraderie to approach a problem is the same sort of place that you're coming from to approach scientific inquiry or, clinical practice. You want to solve a problem. And so if there's even one
Yeah.
thing that you're passionate about, in the sustainability space and you're not sure how to get there, start talking about it with your peers, or, just making a baby step does make an impact. And it also really, I find that it really positively impacts you and the people around you. So I would really encourage you, Miles, and it'll replace some of that guilt and it'll make you feel empowered. So if you see something that's
No, I
like
love
a
that. Yeah,
low-hanging fruit, yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
Another point, our labs, I'm able to tell them how much energy they saved. And so at the beginning of the presentation, I talk to them and I say, hey, um, it may not feel like you're doing a lot when you're turning things off or you've got stickers on your equipment turning things off. And by the end of their kind of journey after 6 months, we're able to really review what they've improved on. Our average lab saves about 3.5 homes worth of energy. And so
That's so cool.
everyone kind of goes, whoa. And I go, see, you don't feel like you're doing anything, but you're doing a lot. And that really empowers our labs to go, okay, I didn't realize it was saving that much. What else can I do? Like, that took almost no effort. What's the additional thing I can do that's going to kind of super speed us into saving more than 3.5 homes?
Yeah, so cool. Well, I think we have to close here, but I appreciate it so much for you both to be on here today and share just the different things that we can do and that you both have done. And I think it's so awesome that more people and labs are adopting these things, and I'm hoping that this podcast reaches even more people through ATS and can add even more to the effort.
Can I add something really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of clinical labs, we have a lot of our labs that do studies with other companies, and they get a lot of needles, blood kits, you name it, and sometimes it comes before the study. And then by the time the study actually starts, they're not usable. We have talked to them about maybe saying, don't send me stuff. That one was, there's just too much turnover. The lack of communication becomes a problem. So always think out of the box and really try to say, okay, well, if I can't fix them sending stuff, what could we do with these expired needles and blood tubes? And we actually give them to our simulation lab where we have, little dummies, and our students are able to practice drawing blood, and they need those blood tubes and they need those needles to practice on what it's like. And it's a dummy, so it's okay if it's expired. So, but definitely not able to be used again for humans. But the little dummies, it's a really great way where the lab doesn't have to purchase its own needles, and our clinical labs are able to just donate anything that's expired that they can't use anymore.
People love saving
No,
money.
Yes.
yeah, just another plug for collaboration and share utilizing your resources to the best. But yeah, so awesome, guys.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both again.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more, visit our website at thoracic.org. Find more podcasts from the ATS assemblies on YouTube. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a show.